Let's bring it right now, best-selling author and columnist for Vanity Fair, and a guy that my mom absolutely adores, especially, well, back when he was writing about Bill Clinton, Christopher Hitchens. Christopher, thank you so much for being with us. You have an article today in Slate. I want to talk about Sarah Palin, the debate process, yes, Iraq, but let's begin with Afghanistan, because that's your article today. How are things going in Afghanistan?
Well, very badly, and it shows that it's not a matter of how many troops you have. That these things are not quantitative, as people keep thinking. Our strategy's wrong in Afghanistan. Just as the strategy had to change in Iraq for it to work, it wasn't a matter of the troop level so much. I think the single most critical thing is the following. Iraq has an economy and will one day, probably fairly soon, be extremely rich. It has real oil and real economy. Afghanistan doesn't have an infrastructure of any kind. It used to make mainly grapes for raisins. It was a vineyard country, orchard country. All that's been chopped down now, and we know what they grow. In fact, they grow 97% of the world's opium. We burn their only crop when we could be buying it. I mean, because of this fetish of the war on drugs, the American ambassador in Kabul even wants to spray their crops from the air, and there are Afghans who remember helicopter gunships from the Russian time. We should be buying that crop. You know, we pay the Turks to grow opium so we can make painkillers. Why don't we give the Afghans that business? You know, until they can regrow their orchards and their vineyards, which will take some time. We're determined to make sure that all the profits of this economy go straight to the pockets of the Taliban.
My co-host, Mika Brzezinski, she will be kind enough to get her father on the show so we can talk to him. And he keeps warning about a surge mentality in Afghanistan, says it would be a terrible mistake. It sounds like you agree with that we can't just blindly say, oh, let's send more troops to Afghanistan, because he fears, and he knows, he was there when it happened, he fears it could cause Afghans to actually strike back at Americans.
There's a very interesting leaked cable from the British ambassador in Kabul, Sir Sherrod Cooper-Cole, so I used to know a bit. A very intelligent man, very outspoken. It looks to me as if he did say the things that are said in the cable. He says, look, if you just bring in more troops, you increase the impression that you're an occupying power, and you give the other side more targets.
He said we're doomed to fail.
He said that the American strategy is absolutely...
So could it be possible that in the long run we succeed in Iraq and fail in Afghanistan?
I think it's always been the obverse of what most people say, that there's a good war in Afghanistan and there's this bad war of choice in Iraq. Iraq was much the most important country to salvage, both from Baathism and from Al-Qaeda. And it can get back on its own feet, and Paul Wolfowitz was actually right to say that it can pay its own way in the long run.
But even
Afghanistan can't do any of those things.
Even if you disagree with Wolfowitz and the neocons and you think this war is regardless, 20 years from now, it sounds like you're saying it is more likely we will see a flourishing, or at least a stable Iraq and a chaotic Afghanistan.
Yeah, it's quite
because of oil mainly?
Yeah.
Wow.
And because of the excuse me, I'm a bit husky this morning. And because of the insanity of the war on drugs. I mean, think of all the countries where that's worked so far. Well, they're determined to say, well, maybe in Afghanistan...
Why aren't we doing what we do with Turkey, and why aren't we buying these crops for painkillers?
Search me. Well, because it's a dogma that we can't have anything to do with opium or drugs, and we insist that the whole product of this extraordinary underground economy, all of the revenues go straight to the Taliban, to Al-Qaeda, and to the warlords. We won't touch that money. So all the real product of Afghanistan is handed by us to the enemy. It's as if we want to lose.
So what do we do?
Well, try to get out of this suicidal mentality. It's time that both Obama and McCain were asked questions about this. It's been discussed at a very high level in Afghanistan. Everyone knows the option of doing this exists, but no candidate wants to touch the war on drugs.
Are you, as someone that grew up watching the Prime Minister take questions from Parliament every week, are you not flabbergasted by the inane formats that we Americans hoist upon our presidential candidates?
It's incredible. I mean, they call it a debate when the two candidates are not allowed to engage with each other directly. Even, actually, though Jim Lehrer did try it at one point when things were flagging.
But they wouldn't even talk to each other.
No, they wouldn't do it, because they're so frozen into this posture of a joint press conference. It's pathetic. You know, by the way, McCain has said that if he's elected as president, actually it's the best thing in his program, he will submit himself to questions on the Hill.
Really?
They'll have a question time.
Do you think Sarah Palin will do the same?
No.
How did Meek and I have been talking about Sarah Palin's performance. Give us your take on Sarah Palin and what it says about John McCain that he selected Sarah Palin as VP.
One of the women who did best at this exposure to question time and debate was Margaret Thatcher. And I simply cannot imagine Mrs. Thatcher ever sort of rolling her hip or winking or doing any of this flirtatious carry-on stuff. And I don't like the politician who forces me to ask, what do you take me for?
Yeah.
As soon as I'm asking that question, I'm asking the wrong question. I shouldn't be in that position. I asked it of McCain, too. Are you really telling me that's the best person you could find out of all the people in the United States, all the women in the United States? Because if so, it's a terrible judgment on you. And it seems to have had a suitably chastening effect on his chances.
Pat Buchanan?
Well, I want to ask him about Afghanistan.
Okay, let's go back to Afghanistan.
I want to ask about Pakistan. There's no doubt we're being effective in killing some of the leaders in Pakistan, the Taliban and also Al-Qaeda. Is it worth the price if we destabilize a country of 170 million Muslims, deeply anti-American, with nuclear weapons?
Well, I don't think we're destabilizing it. I think there is actually a Pakistan-Afghan war going on now. The Taliban rule in Afghanistan was another name for Pakistani imperialism, really. The Pakistanis always wanted to run Afghanistan as their colony or their dependency because it gives them strategic depth. Right. And the thing that really matters to them, India, fighting against our great democratic pluralist, English-speaking ally, India, in which we have a huge stake, which also has nuclear weapons, many more than Pakistan, is a local superpower. The best foreign policy change the Bush administration made, in my opinion, was away from our historical underpinning of Pakistan and to a much broader alliance with India, including a nuclear one. I think that's a huge improvement.
I've heard other people and read other articles about, and it's flown under our radar. We read the papers every day. We talk about what's going on. But we turn around, and apparently the Bush administration has created a stronger relationship with India, that may be one of his lasting legacies, military, moving forward.
But also economic and political and diplomatic.
Well, one of the problems India was an ally of the Soviet Union in the Cold War. During the previous Afghan war, they were on the side of the Soviets.
It's true that the Indians were a bit worse than neutralists in the Cold War, but that's all changed now. And remember, the Indians were fighting against Al-Qaeda long before we were, and were helping the Northern Alliance against the Taliban long before we were. And it's a predominantly Hindu country, and Hinduism was the first religion on which bin Laden declared war. So we have a huge potential third world ally against this madness, and I think it's an opportunity that should have been seized earlier.
Iran is also an enemy of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda wants us to bomb Iran.
Al-Qaeda has a position on whether we bomb Iran.
No, Al-Qaeda in Iraq has said, blow them back to the Stone Age.
Well, let's put it this way. Afterwards, there are all kinds of conflicts within conflicts. After 9/11, the Iranians helped us.
Sorry.
After 9/11, the Iranian intelligence agency helped us in Afghanistan.
Well, if you remember, if Bill Clinton hadn't stopped them, the Iranians were going to invade Afghanistan on their own to overthrow the Taliban after their envoys were murdered in Mazar-i-Sharif. They were bringing their armor right up to the border. They hate the Taliban, and they've actually on that border been quite cooperative ever since. But look, Al-Qaeda wouldn't be the only Sunni Arabs who would secretly want the United States to take out the Iranian nuclear facilities.
Very quickly,
they're terrified, especially the Gulf states, of nuclear blackmail once a Shia theocracy has a nuke.
Yeah. You have a flag pin on your lapel?
That's the flag of the Iraqi Kurds, of the Free Kurdistan in the north of Iraq.
All right.
The greatest outstanding success of regime change in the region.
All right. Thank you so much, Christopher Hitchens.
It was a pleasure.
Greatly appreciate you being here. Hope you come back more often.
All right. Yes, absolutely.
All right. Very good.